think I'm gonna make it, guys. Fourth book, final book in my book review marathon. Today is A Beautiful Ugly by Alice Feeney. This is labeled as a psychological thriller. I didn't really feel like it was that much of a thriller. I thought it was definitely psychological. The whole thing is the main character is supposed to be losing his mind, going crazy, hearing things that aren't there, seeing things that aren't there. And I thought instead of losing his mind, it felt more like he was just being gaslit. I never got the impression that he was going crazy. I felt like he was too sane the entire novel. Things would happen and he would question them. That was the extent. But I never felt like he was irrational at any point. I feel like things were set up so that it would be natural for him to think that he was seeing his dead wife. He's in mourning. He loved this woman. And so the fact that he's seeing her everywhere, I just don't think was so out of the ordinary. That happens with grief. That's my little soapbox there. Let's jump into the book because that's all I have time for. I loved this book. I thought it was amazing. It's again one of those books that kind of goes back and forth in narrative perspectives and sort of in time, but I thought going back in time, and there's this great twist. I did not see that twist coming, and it made the novel. My favorite parts were from the Abby perspective. I felt like it gave the novel the depth that it needed to achieve its ends. If we hadn't had those, this novel would not have been what it was. But we open. We have our main character, Grady Green, who is a writer. He is married to a woman named Abby, who is a journalist, and he is waiting to hear from his agent, Kitty, who is also Abby's godmother, as to whether or not his latest novel is a New York Times bestseller. He lives in London, so this is a huge deal that his novel could be a New York Times bestseller across the pond. He calls her because she's been acting strange lately. She's working odd hours, she hasn't been showing up when she needs to, and at this point, he's a little frustrated because she promised she would be there when he got the news. So he calls her and she's like, I'm sorry, I know I'm late. I'm on my way home. I stopped to get fish and chips, which have significance to them as a couple. It's something that they celebrate with, they mourn with, they whatever. So she goes, have you heard from them? And he goes, no. And she said, well, you need to get off the phone just in case they're trying to call. Hangs up, gets the news, 2 thumbs up. He calls her back again and he's like, oh, I've got great news. So they're on the phone when she goes, oh, there's somebody in the road. There's a woman in the road. And he's like, oh, just leave her alone. Like, don't worry about it. She's like, I'm not going to leave this woman stranded in the road. She gets out of her car. She leaves the car on. She leaves the phone on. And then they never hear from her again. It is now a year later, and his life has fallen to pieces. He hasn't been able to write. He can't get over his grief for his wife. And he's destitute. He has no money. He does have his dog, Columbo, which if you saw my review for... There's just so many reviews. If you saw my review for Part of Your World, you will know my feelings on dogs. You will know my feelings on animals in novels. I liked Columbo. I thought he served a great purpose. He was something of a symbol. My only issue with him was towards the end of the novel, I don't know, certain things happened that I was like, wouldn't he have figured that out? Anyways, and I felt like he sort of just trailed off, like his purpose and importance just kind of became superfluous. But he does have his dog Columbo, and he has received a call from Kitty, and he's like, oh great, this is not going to be good. She's going to drop me, because he had a 2-book deal and he only delivered 1 book. He can't set pen to paper. He can't do anything now that Abby's gone. So he arrives at Kitty's office, and Kitty is an amazing literary agent, which I'm kind of jealous. I wish she were real, and I wish she would represent me. That'd be super duper cool. Well, sort of. You'll figure it out in the end, or you'll find out in the end. And she's like, yeah, I know all these things are happening, and your publisher wants their advance back. you promised them 2 books, you have only delivered 1, they want their money. And he's like, I don't have the money. He goes, I know, and I stood up for you, I defended you, and I have a solution. I recently inherited this cabin in the Scottish Highlands from a recently deceased client, and I think it'd be a great retreat for you. It's free lodging, and it will be that place that you need to kind of pull back, recenter, and get your writing back on track. He's like, yeah, totally cool. I'm game. I need the help. He packs up Columbo, he packs up his stuff, and he drives to the ferry. And this is where things start to get fishy, because there had been a schedule posted online, but that is not the schedule at the ferry dock. So he spends the night in his car, wakes up, other cars are there. He's like, all right, so this is it. He is getting ready to drive onto the ferry when the ferry driver stops him. She's like, who are you? And this island is called the Isle of Amberley. And he's like, oh, I'm going to the Isle of Amberley. And she's like, but I don't know you. And strangers are not allowed on the Isle of Amberley. He's like, oh, but I got permission. I'm using Kitty Goldman's cabin. And she's like, all right, well, you can come, but you have to leave your car. He's like, but I need my car. My stuff is in my car. No, well, you take what you can carry. That's the only way. Like, visitors are not allowed to have cars on the island. He's like, all right, sure, okay. And this is when he first starts thinking that he sees Abby. So the thing about Abby was that she was wearing a red coat when she disappeared. However, the red coat was found lying on the side of the road. But this is when he starts seeing women in red coats. Nobody else can verify that they see this woman, even when Sandy, who is the ferry driver, is taking him to the cabin. He thinks he sees Abby, and she's like, I don't know what you're talking about. They get to Amberley, and this is when Sandy, she's like, hey, what's up? First off, I'm the sheriff. Second off, do you need a ride to the cabin? He's like, yeah, that'd be super duper great. So he gets there, and he's not expecting much, but this cabin is really nice. It's well fitted, looks like it's been recently stocked. So he's like, wow, thank you, Kitty, for making sure that this cabin is ready for me. He is an alcoholic of sorts. He won't actually admit to being an alcoholic because he only drinks at home, but it has caused issues in the past. And as he's sitting there, so this cabin belonged to a really famous author called Charles Whitaker. He had no clue that Whitaker had even died. All he knew was that Whitaker fell off the face of the map. So he's in this cabin, and he finds Whitaker's stash of liquor, and so he proceeds to just drink. And I'm like, that bold move. Bold move. Another thing that Kitty had mentioned was that Charles had this 10th book, this unfinished manuscript that had never gotten published and nobody had ever seen. So while he's at this cabin, Columbo starts kind of scratching at the floor and making a big deal. Underneath the floorboards is the 10th book, as well as a skeletal hand. And he's like, ooh, I don't know about that, but yeah, let me read that book. He absolutely loves the book. And he decides, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to plagiarize. So I'm going to write to Kitty, and I'm going to tell her that I have this great idea and it will be in the mail soon. He proceeds to start to plagiarize this novel. But before we get into all of that, Sandy invites him to have dinner with herself and her sister Midge the next day. There are no phones on the island. Frankly, there's only 25 people on this island, period. And they all happen to be women, which was not something that I caught on to. I think the signs were there, but I was listening to it, so my focus was not always focused. But yes, it's a very isolated island. There's not much to do. And he has trouble getting off the island. Every time he brings it up, there's always a reason that he can't get on that ferry. Lunch. It's only 11:30, but I have a long day. Gotta start eating now. It's here that we get our first flashback. My plan was to kind of give you an overview all at once, but that's not how I work. I might start combining them at a certain point, but Flashback 1, these flashbacks are from Abby's perspective, and they give a little timeline of events as to how close she is before she disappears. In this first one, we see her meeting with a therapist, and she's talking about how she's not happy in her marriage and she wants to leave her husband. She also goes into detail about how she and her husband met, which was on a plane, and he thought that she was sitting in her seat. He was definitely one of those alpha male guys who was not going to take her answer because that was not the answer he wanted to hear. But he finally accepts it, and he sits next to her, and she wants nothing to do with him. He tries to talk to her, but she wants nothing to do with him until he tells her that he's an author, that he's a writer. She has this thing about writers, so she's like, absolutely, positively, tell me everything. This gets kind of gross, but they stop talking, and he battens down the hatches for the night. He's gonna go to sleep, and she's kind of like, I don't know what's going on here. She finally realizes he's not going to talk to her anymore. He's asleep. She pulls the covers up over her, and then she feels his hand slip under the covers and does things that you shouldn't be doing on a plane in public with a stranger that you just met. So that was a nice moment. They do end up spending the day together, leads down the road to marriage. But you know what? I wrote all of these flashbacks in one place, so we're just going to do them all. Her next flashback, we learn about the Music Man. I'm never going to get that fly. When this flashback opens up, we learn that her mother had inherited a vase and a piano from a family member. She would prefer to have gotten money, but this was what she got, so that's what happened. And she decides, let's have my daughter learn how to play the piano. Abby has no aptitude for the piano, and her mother is getting kind of frustrated. She has brought in a piano teacher that Abby calls the Music Man, and after a couple of sessions, he proposes a deal. And he says, look, I will play the piano, because they close the door. I will play the piano, but you've got to do things for me. So he plays the piano with one hand, unzips his pants with the other. And I had questions here because, granted, this is not current times, so things were different in terms of open doors. My question was, after all of these weeks of her being a terrible piano player, why would her mother buy that all of a sudden she can play the scales perfectly? That her piano playing is so much better. So for me, that did not quite compute, but they carry on with this agreement until one day her mom walks in with a plate of cookies, sees what's going on, knocks him out with that vase, locks the piano, and is like, we are never going to touch this thing again. Abby also notes that she never sees that man again. And she also never sees the axe that they used to have again either, insinuating that the mother has killed the Music Man. Third flashback is more about the dissolution of their marriage. They are at a party of one of her oldest friends. This friend actually has a child that she has named after Abby. And this is where she claims that she starts seeing the cracks in their marriage because he's putting on this front in front of all of her friends. He's the life of the party, but she's just like, we are falling apart. They do end up having sex, but she was like, I didn't feel anything. And from then on, I never felt anything. And we also get just a little snippet about their feelings regarding children, how he does not want children, but she's open to it. The next flashback, he has insisted that they buy a fixer-upper. They are dumping their money into this fixer-upper, and she's a bit resentful because he has isolated her from everybody and everything without her consent, and he thinks that her world should revolve around him. We have an instance in which the contractors, or whoever it is, finds something in the foundation, which is an old tradition from a couple hundred years back called the buried lovers, where they would bury things pertaining to them in the foundation of the home, so that if anything ever happened, it meant that they would find each other in the afterlife. And he is like, we don't have the money to deal with this, because she has contacted the Historical Society, and their suggestion is, if you can't put it back in the foundation, put it as closely back there as you can. So she's like, please, like, we just need to honor these people. And he's like, okay. Only for her to then overhear some of the workmen laughing about the fact that he lied to her. It's around here that she's had enough, and she wants to go to the Isle of Amberley, which is where Grady is. So now we have had all of our flashbacks. We have kind of set up what is happening with Abby. As Grady is living his life, he starts receiving old clippings from Abby's articles. A lot of these articles are about battered women and about injustices done to women. Like one woman whose daughter didn't come home. She figured out her daughter must have gone to a party. She goes to this party and she discovers her daughter being raped. She then attacks the rapist, but she is the one that is sent to prison. Her daughter is put into the system. It ruins her life. He starts getting clippings, and he's just like, from observations that he's made of some of the women on this island, he's like, are these the women from the clippings? Loved that little nugget, because now we're wondering, what's happening? Is this a safe place? And if these are the women from the articles, why? Why did they all end up here? As I said, there are no working phones on the island. However, as he's in town, he passes by this telephone box, which acts as a little library, and he hears the phone ringing, and he knows the phone is ringing. He picks up. Abby is on the other end of the line, but then it goes dead. I don't remember where he goes. He walks into one of the businesses, and he's talking to the woman there, and she's like, oh no, we don't have any working phones, like you must have been imagining it. XYZ happened, and we have not fixed the phone lines. At some other point, he's talking to another woman who gives a completely different version as to why none of the phones on the island are working. So we're getting that psychological part. And in many ways, I think the psychological part was done well. I just don't think it was a thriller. So redwoods are indigenous to the United States. Somehow, the Isle of Amberley has redwoods. And he's talking to somebody because he's also noticed that there are no birds on the island. And this person, I think it was Sandy, tells him that there are no birds on the island because some years ago, I think like 100 odd years ago, there had been a great famine, and the redwoods had started dying, and they attributed it to the birds. So they killed all the birds, and anytime they've ever seen another bird on this island, they have shot it. And in her words, Mother Nature knows how to warn its inhabitants. So in some form or fashion, they have trained this island not to have birds, which I find highly implausible. Please tell me if I'm wrong and this is something that could actually be done. But I'm like, how can you train a whole sect of creatures to never come to nature? We are now at Sandy's for dinner. We meet her sister Midge. Midge is a terrible cook. I wish that played more into the story than it does, but it doesn't. They are having dinner, and we learn that Sandy is the only person who was born and raised on this island and has never left. Midge is an actress. She had gone to Los Angeles for a while, and then she realized she wasn't willing to do some of the things they wanted her to do. So Sandy sent her money and brought her back home, and she has been here ever since. And Midge is kind of a fount of information during this dinner. She's the one that points out that one of the women, Cora, only wears green, and this is where Grady is like, is she the woman from the article and she only wears green because that was what she wore in prison? Which Cora has an explanation for it later, but a little bit of spoiler, yes, all these women are the women from the articles. And so I was like, I really don't think her explanation is correct. I think, yes, it had more to do with the fact that she wore green in prison. Midge also mentions two other things. One, a year prior, almost to the date, a visitor showed up, a woman, and was never seen again. Two, Cora, a man missing a hand washed up on the beach. Grady starts to freak out because he's like, missing a hand? So he takes Sandy back to his cabin to show her the hand, but it's gone. This is a theme that we see where things are appearing and disappearing from this cabin, and he's absolutely certain somebody is breaking in. There are a couple of key items, a magic 8-ball, a harmonica. I think there was one other thing, but the harmonica and the 8-ball like disappear after a certain period of time. He thinks he hears the harmonica. He uses his magic 8-ball to tell him what to do. This is when he gets his first article. This is also when he stumbles across the local church and meets the local Reverend Melody Bates. He takes his ring because they have a roof fund. He takes his ring, he puts it in the donation box, and she's like, thanks so much, that will go a long way. As he is leaving the church, he stumbles across the cemetery where he notices a bunch of children's graves where they all died on the same day. And then he also sees an empty grave ready to be filled, which we got a lot of good foreshadowing here, a lot of things that are creating that atmosphere. So I will say his storylines felt a little monotonous at times because frankly, he's trapped on an island with 25 women. He has nothing to do except take walks and hang out with his dog. So yeah, it's totally understandable, which is why I felt like Abby's perspectives were so important, because they added a level of excitement and mystique to the novel. While he's also at the cemetery, this elderly woman appears and she tells him that he needs to leave the island. So we get a little bit more about how Grady and Abby disagree on having children, and he also thinks that she needs to quit her job because her life revolves around him. She had been stalked by somebody. It turns out to be Cora, so the woman who killed the rapist. It turns out to be the family of the rapist because they did not like how they were, or he was depicted in her article. This creepy doll that had been found in her abandoned car was actually attributed back to them. Grady is given access to Charles's car. So he starts to use this to get around the island, and he drives to this rock landmark called Orphan's Rock. I think it was actually closed, but he walked up there anyways. But he stumbles across the Reverend again, and he notices a ring that she's wearing that Midge and Sandy also wear. The Reverend tells him why it's called Orphan Rock, because some couple hundred years prior, this king had sent his men to come and pillage the village. The adults took the kids and hid them, and then they, meanwhile, were massacred. So the children had been instructed, you do not come down until we come get you. So now there are multiple thoughts as to they died waiting, they died because they got lost in the way down, they turned into the rocks so that they could now guard and protect this island that their parents were unable to do. The Reverend thinks that's a whole lot of bunk, that these rocks are just volcanic formations. But what she does say is that men have been causing problems there forever. So we start to get a lot of mentions about like the term men, which I thought verbiage played a huge part in the success of this novel. It created red herrings. It created a distraction. So you're looking over here where the real stuff is actually happening over here. And a lot of it had to do with the words that she used, which I thought was so clever. Naturally, Grady gets lost on his way down and he hears his voice on the wind. So we're trying to build that suspense and that tension. So he goes to the Stumble Inn, which I thought a lot of the names around here were super clever. So he goes to the Stumble Inn and he's talking with the owner, Arabella, and he asks her about these rings because she's wearing one. And she's like, oh, these represent the people who are part of the Amberley Trust. And the Amberley Trust was a group put together by Sandy in order to protect the island. Cora had given him some myrtle bog tea, which eventually he learns is a hallucinogenic. So this is then, I thought it was clever, but it didn't quite do what it needed to do, because he's like, oh, maybe all of these things that I keep seeing and hearing are associated with the fact that I'm taking a hallucinogenic. So I think the problem with me was that Feeney gave us too easy of an out. She didn't really play anymore with that, where I thought she could have, because now we're like, oh yeah, he's not crazy. He's just drinking hallucinogenic tea. Arabella also reveals that Charlie and Sandy had been really good friends. So as I'd mentioned, he is plagiarizing book 10. At this point, he has finished it and he has sent it off to Kitty. So she reveals that Charlie and Sandy were really good friends, and Sandy read everything he ever wrote. But because nobody ever saw book 10, he's not sure if Sandy read book 10. But if Sandy has read book 10, she's automatically going to know that he plagiarized it. So he's freaking out. He's like, I've got to go find Sandy. He goes to her house, and Midge is like, she's not here. She's actually celebrating the anniversary. He's able to get her to tell him where Sandy would be, which would be at Darkside Cave. So he goes to Darkside Cave, and he finds Sandy there, absolutely wasted. And she tells him the story because there are no children on the island. So she tells him the story as to why there are no children. And what happened was the children had been at school, but their teacher had been sick. So the islanders had brought in a substitute. This substitute, instead of teaching, would just go to the bar to get drunk. So while he was there, another student, had led all the children to Darkside Cave for some reason. And the thing about Darkside Cave is that at high tide, it floods. So all the children got caught and died. And then from that moment on, they were like, we will never have children on this island again. But she's there, and she is grieving. I don't know. I thought she was a little, like, her behaviors and her responses to him were a little outlandish, but I guess we're just supposed to assume it's because she's drunk and she's sad. But he does ask her if she had read book 10, and she says yes. He does say, hey, like, high tide is on its way. Do you want to ride? She redirects the conversation, and then the next thing we know, he has left. One of the weird things about this island is its weather patterns. So you never know, it's going to be sunny, it's going to be cloudy, is it going to be whatever. So he's driving home, and it's super foggy, and he ends up hitting someone. Turns out it's Abby, and he's like, oh my gosh. The biggest difference, though, is her eye color, and she does not know him at all, and she actually introduces herself as Aubrey. She's a little weirded out, not a little, she is weirded out by his behavior, but he cannot help himself. He's like, I know this is Abby, why does she not recognize me? She has him take her to her pottery studio, which is called Beautiful Ugly. They chat, he picks up a pamphlet, so they don't have phones, but they use walkies. And that's another thing, is you'll hear the crackling of the walkie, which I gotta say, regarding the audiobook, I didn't need all of the sound effects. I just didn't. But walkie crackles to life. Sandy is missing, so he takes Aubrey to Midge. Around here, he has received a letter from Kitty, a very cryptic letter from Kitty, being like, I found out some things about this island that you need to know, but I can't put them in a letter. Additionally, some things that I forgot to mention were that because of the deaths of all of the children, it kind of wrecked the island. A lot of people left, the population dwindled, and according to Sandy, everything was ruined because of one man. We do actually learn that Aubrey has a daughter, a young girl named Hope. She is the one exception at the moment. When he takes Aubrey to Midge's, he has an opportunity to look around, and he sees a picture of two young girls, and he's like, that one right there is absolutely positively my wife. But I don't know who this other girl is. This other girl must be Sandy's daughter who had drowned in the cave. And he's like, but Abby never told me that she had a history on Amberly. He also re-encounters the woman from the cemetery whose name is Morag, and she is Midge and Sandy's mother. She yet again warns him to get off the island. Grady is hell-bent on meeting this person that Abby is now married to. So he hunts down her husband only to discover it's a wife. And I think this is the third same-sex couple. And so I was just starting to be like, what in the world? Because I hadn't put together 2 and 2 that it was only women on the island. And I was like, why do we have all these women in relationships with other women? And I know that's the culture right now, so it makes sense that it would be in the book. But I was like, usually it's not so... There's not such a heavy emphasis on that. There's more of a balance in the type of relationships that are happening in books. So I was just like, So now me, who hadn't been paying attention, was starting to think, wow, something's a little off here. So when he meets Aubrey's wife, he is trying to convince her that Aubrey is Abby. He pulls out that pamphlet from the Beautiful Ugly pottery, and the woman on the front, not Abby, nothing like her. So he's like, well, I guess I must have been wrong. It's all that Myrtle Bog tea. Around here, we do learn that Grady had a vasectomy without letting Abby know, but he knew that she would, if she wanted a child, she was going to make it happen. So he was going to make sure it didn't happen. Cora also reveals that he's not the first author. Aside from Charles Whitaker, he is not the first author to have been on this island, and that author had met an untimely end. He wasn't a very good author, but about a year after he had arrived, he had tried to leave via rowboat, and the rowboat sank and he had died. He gets back into his car, and somehow, even after rereading it, I couldn't figure it out. Somehow he had come into possession of one of these walkies. So he's in there and he starts to listen to all of these women talking about him. And he's like, they're setting me up. All of these things that are happening are not in my head. These women are setting me up. Which I was like, oh, I love it. I love it. He also realizes he has no more gas in his car. But he could have sworn that he'd had half a tank when he had gotten out. And he was just like, these women are not going to let me leave. Like, they're trying to stop me from leaving this island. He passes back by that phone booth, and he notices that all the books inside are his. He goes inside on the off chance that the phone is working, and it is. He calls Kitty. She yet again tries to warn him about something, but they get cut off. Now he stumbles across everybody at church, all these 25 women at the church, and they admit to everything. But not before Abby shows up. And Abby is now actually Abby. She had been wearing contacts. All of this was a ploy to get back at him because he was abusive towards her, plus one other secret. Abby had been resentful towards her husband and had begun to wonder what it would be like if she just vanished. Because he seems to, like, absolutely adore her, to truly be in love with her. But from her perspective, like all these Abby perspectives, that's not the case. He thinks he loves her, but he doesn't really love her. He's just more taking advantage of her. He's just a really selfish person, and he thinks that everything about her should be about him. She also reveals that she had something that she was going to tell Grady, but she wasn't able to because she had stumbled across that person in the road. And spoiler here, if you haven't already figured it out, she was pregnant. She'd had IVF treatments. So this then plays into her disappearance. She had lied about being Aubrey because she just wanted to mess with his head. She wanted to see, how he would handle it and if he would go crazy. She takes him to her home, opens the door, and we automatically see the piano as well as the metronome, which was another symbol that was used whenever Abby was taking those piano lessons, and it was tick, tick, ticking. She retells the story of all of those children who had died. However, one detail that had been left out before was she was the child who had led them to their deaths. She had been sick that day. The music man, who is that substitute teacher, had come and he was going to molest her. She's able to get away. She was kind of rebuffed, so she decided to run away. This magic 8-ball and the harmonica were hers. She uses this magic 8-ball to tell her should she do it or not. It's like, yes. So she goes to the school and she's telling the best friend Isla, and Isla's like, well, I'm absolutely coming with you. They use the magic 8-ball and they're like, oh, should we go here? And it says no. Should we go to Darkside Cave? And it's like, yes. So they are leaving only for all the other children to follow them. They had no clue why they were not supposed to go to these caves, and then they figured it out. Somehow she's the only survivor. It does not explain how, but she is the only survivor. She feels like she is at fault for all of their deaths. Now she and Kitty move to London. She also begins to reveal the deeper plot behind it all, where all of these issues are because of men. This started because of the music man trying to do something he wasn't supposed to do. All of the women decided, we're just gonna get rid of the men. So over time, if there had been a man running the bar, once he died, they would put out an ad, and then the people that they chose would be women. They strategically got rid of all of the men on this island so that the island would be peaceful and safe again. They called it positive discrimination, which I don't know. I thought this could have all been a little bit more sinister. She does admit that all the women from her articles are the women on this island. It's kind of like a safe haven, like a refugee camp for women who need to start over, who are escaping situations. And he's like, well, what are you trying to escape from? And she's like, you. The baby, not his, but his whole purpose to be here is to write books and provide money for the island, because they hate having visitors on the island. So just like Charles Whitaker before him, he is here to make them money so that they don't have to have people that they don't want to be there. Unfortunately for him, that means that men are not allowed to live on the island, and not just like physically reside. They are not allowed to be alive. So the fact that he couldn't get off the island, not coincidental. So his purpose is to make them money. While he's there, that's the thing that's going to keep him alive. But then here, biggest spoiler of all, well, not the biggest spoiler. We have two big spoilers. So the first big spoiler is that he was the woman on the road, which I made a point to reread the beginning and then do a closer read of this. There was really nothing except the idea that he is an unreliable narrator. There's nothing that proves that he wasn't at his house. Because in the beginning, because there are context clues, because that's what I was reading. I was like, was she just being very ambiguous? Because a lot of her language is ambiguous in this novel. I was like, was she just being ambiguous? But no, because he talks about how Columbo had just been on in the kitchen sleeping, and then how he was drinking whiskey. And I was like, I wish we'd had a little more explanation as to why it looked like he was in his kitchen in his home when he actually was not, because I could understand how it could have seemed he was at his house, but she gave context clues that made you think that he's actually in his house. And what had happened was he had called her, and then after he had called her, he went and he put on her jacket and he laid in the road and he waited for her to come. So the second time they were on the phone, he was in the road, and I was like, she didn't hear anything. Like, so there was just a lot I thought that was missing from that scenario. But he had done that because he didn't want her to leave him. He has these issues because both of his parents died, and he was like, oh, everybody leaves. I'm like, literally, nobody left you. Your parents died. That's it. But he thought, because of her sporadic hours and her new strange behavior, that she was having an affair. And then that night, when she was not home, when she said she was going to be, he just knew that she was with her lover. He had also found the positive pregnancy test, and he was like, there's no way this kid could be mine. I had a vasectomy. So this was his solution for her not to leave him. But frankly, it was more selfish than that, because if she left him, then he knew Kitty would leave as well, because Kitty was the godmother, and there was no way that Kitty would stay with him if her goddaughter did not, and he didn't want to lose that valuable of an agent. So she approached him, he chloroformed her, and then he threw her over the cliff. After this revelation, he hightails it out of there. He goes back to his cabin only to find Kitty. And this is where the juice comes. This is where we get the tea. He's like, what are you doing here? And she's like, so here's the deal. My name's not actually Kitty. I had a best friend. She named her daughter after me. My name is Abby. I was like, are you kidding me? All of these flashbacks were her. And I had thought some things did not align, but I was like, well, maybe it's just those little things where I wasn't paying enough attention, or just, those things like Grady is going to tell himself that he's not going crazy. So I'm like, oh my gosh, I totally pegged. There was something wrong with these flashbacks. They lined up enough, but they didn't line up perfectly with what we were learning about Abby and Grady, but they lined up enough because Kitty had been married to Charles Whitaker. It was just like mind blown. He used to call her Kitty, so after he died, she changed her name to Kitty and she started living her best life. So the whole deal, so we're going back to all of those children dying, and it had been the Music Man, and it was kind of an ulterior motive where they were like, yes, let's bring him in and let's teach him a lesson. Abby did not kill him when she pushed him in her bid for freedom. She had pushed him, he had hit his head. It was actually Sandy. Sandy and Charles had come to take care of things. Sandy had killed him, but then they buried him together. This is the one thing that kind of glued them together and made them best friends. But then their falling out was because he learned about their plot to get rid of all the men on the island. He did not think it was a good idea. He was not in line with this, but they were not going to let him leave because he was their source of income. He donated much of his proceeds to the trust. Over time, he became so miserable he couldn't write, and without writing, he was nothing, so he hung himself. So the story that he died was incorrect. He'd actually committed suicide. But Kitty was originally from Amberley. So when Abby's mother died, that's why she then came to live on Amberley as well. And when it came to Music Man, obviously the mother didn't kill him, she just cut off his hand. Kitty had put the hand in the hole with book 10, just as a nice little surprise for Grady. But she knew about book 10 as well. She didn't know where it was, but I think at some point they did discover it, and that's obviously how it showed up with the hand. But she was like, I don't know. So the other author, like, all of this was a test, because once Charles was gone, they had no income. So they were like, let's just continue to bring these authors on the island, keep them hostage here, and then they can make us money until we decide it's time for them to go. He didn't have what it took, but she was very surprised at what Grady was able to do with that novel. And she's like, even though it was basically plagiarized, you made it your own. This book may be better than your New York Times bestseller. So you have a choice. You can do what we want, or we can just kill you now. So now he has been offered this permanent position as writer in residence, and we pick up 1 year later, where Grady has written the book. It has done super well, and I'm a little confused here, because what Kitty proposes is, you might not have any ideas, but Charles was full of them. He just was too picky about what he wanted to complete. So I'm sure all of his unfinished manuscripts are hanging around here somewhere, and you can do what you did with this other book, which they call Beautiful Ugly, because she didn't think Beautiful Ugly was very good when it was just book 10, but she loved what Grady did to it. So in my mind, I'm like, okay, so he's the new Charles Whitaker. He's going to be there for a decade. He's going to serve them well. But we pick up at this year mark. He falls asleep. He wakes up in a coffin lined with his own books, and he realizes, like, so Abby's worst fear had been water, and now his worst fear was being buried alive. So now he's being buried alive, and he's like, well, I guess this is just gonna be how it ends. Right before he passes out, he hears her say, "I hope you die in your sleep," which had actually been a profession of love between the two of them, because what better way to go than in your sleep? But I was like, what? So for me, I thought the ending was a bit rushed. I did not understand. Like, you kind of had a clue, because he was walking around with Columbo, and one of the women was like, "Oh, I've always wanted a black lab. If you ever need some help, or if you ever don't want him, I'll take him," or something like that. So you kind of get the idea that maybe something's in the works, but I was like, why was it only a year? If this one book has done so well, I thought we were going to do another book, or even multiple books, because of the insinuation of how many ideas he could plagiarize. I don't feel like he was putting up a stink the same way that Charles was. I didn't really care for the end, but it is what it is. And overall, great book. I'd love to know what you think. I'll also love to know if you have any more similar type novels, because I find that I really like mysteries. I do like psychological things. I like it when I get tricked. I like it when I think I know, but I don't. So yeah, there we go. I am so proud of myself. I have 3 minutes before I need to be out of here. So touchdown. Have a great day. Bye.